So fellas, the talk of the town in MMA is Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev being cancelled due to Dricus Du Plessis' injury. And a lot of people are confused about who's going to be headlining, who's going to be fighting on UFC 317. But UFC 317 can still be stacked. I don't know why there's so many people panicking over it. It can still be a stacked card. We're going to be building the card. Now, there's been 4 fights on this card already announced. Paulo Costa versus Roman Kopylov, Brandon Royval versus Manel Cap, Michael Johnson, Daniel Zilliber, and Jonathan Denise versus Justin Tafa. But we are going to be building this card, and we'll put the timestamps for the early prelims, the prelims, and the main card in the description. But it can still be a good card. People need to stop panicking. The first early prelim I would make for International Fight Week would be Jacoby Smith versus Alex Morono. This is, I'm not going to say passing of the torch because they're not even similar to each other in any way, but this is just a prospect beating a veteran in the UFC to kind of build his name on each other. But yeah, Jacoby Smith's a major prospect at 170. He hasn't got out there and had this massive, beating these massive names. He's not really a big name himself, but the vast majority of his wins are by knockouts. He's got 8 knockouts, 80% of his wins are by KO. We just got a really good KO in his UFC debut against Preston Parsons. He comes from a bit of a wrestling background too. He actually predominantly is a wrestler with heavy hands. He looks fucking unstoppable at 170. Morono's a victim. This dude just gets beaten up for a living these days. He's Alex Morono. So he's a victim. We need to take out the trash, get him outside the UFC, get him against Jacoby Smith, so then Jacoby Smith can knock out Morono, send him outside the UFC once and for all. No more Morono, and Jacoby Smith can pick up a win. We gave Alex Morono a chance to beat up an old man when he fought Nico Price at UFC 302 last year. He failed that. Give him Jacoby Smith, let him get finished, get out the UFC, and build the name of Jacoby Smith, because more people need to be hearing about him. And I feel like International Fight Week, starting off the card, getting a good knockout over Morono would be a good way to kind of build the profile of Jacoby Smith. So I'd let him knock out Morono for the first fight on UFC 317, followed up by Jonathan Denise versus Justin Tafa. Now, obviously, this has already been announced for the card, but I would have this on the early prelims as well. You can't really trust the heavyweight division on anything above the early prelims. It is just slop. It's like getting served beans on toast when you go to a high-end restaurant. It's like, it doesn't really deserve to be there. But I feel like it could still, kind of perform. You've got Justin Tafa, who's he's a bit unreliable, is Justin Tafa. Sometimes he can kind of show up, and then other times he can get put to sleep. He's just been knocked out in 35 seconds by Taliesin Teixeira against Jonathan Denise, who is a heavy-handed dude. He comes from Glory Kickboxing. He was on a bit of a roll before his fight with Marcin Tybura, so I could actually see this fight ending in a knockout. 2 stand-up guys that kind of like to swing and brawl. You've got Justin Tafa, that classic fat Samoan swinging style, and Jonathan Denise, who's a little bit more technical, but still a fat heavyweight who's heavy-handed. So I can see this ending in a knockout. A good way to kick off the card, but I wouldn't really risk putting a heavyweight fight, 2 unranked fat heavyweights, anything above the early prelims, because after the first round, they could be gas and it could be an awful fight. So Denise, Tafa, not a bad matchup, extremely low level, unreliable because it's heavyweight. I'd put that as the second fight on the card. And then for the third fight, I think we should have Alexandre Topuria against Cody Gibson. Now, obviously, Alexandre Topuria is the brother of Ilia Topuria. He won his UFC debut in UFC 312 against Kobe Thickness, and he's now 1-0 in the UFC. Now, my only real concern with this fight is I'm not sure they'd both fight on the same card, because Topuria's always in the corner of, or Ilia's always in the corner of Alexandre, and Alexandre is always in the corner of Ilia. But if we are going to have Ilia on this card, which I've kind of just spoiled who the main event's going to be, then I feel like Alexandre Topuria on the early prelims will be a massive opportunity as well. I put him against Cody Gibson. Cody Gibson's another victim, man. He's a high-paced fighter. He's a bit of a veteran of the UFC, so he is a step up, and it is a test for Alexandre Topuria to test how good he is. But I think this is quite favourable for Topuria. Cody Gibson's a very high-paced, hittable fighter, and Alexandre Topuria has a very kind of similar style to Ilia, where he likes to walk you down, get you against the cage, land that big overhand, and then maybe take you down. And I feel like that's exactly what Topuria wants, somebody coming at him like Cody Gibson. So I think for Alexandre Topuria, get him tested on the early prelims against Cody Gibson, but if he goes out there and sleeps Cody Gibson, which he probably will, then he's just built the name on UFC 317 while his brother Ilia Topuria is on the card, and I feel like it's a good placement for Alexandre Topuria to be on the card. So I would have him on this card. I know there's a bit of a not controversy, but you can kind of say that him being the cornerman of Ilia Topuria could kind of mess things up, but I'd have him on the card anyway. They're both going to be fighting on the card. He's going to win. So Topuria, Gibson, I would have that fight. Prospect derailed, Peyton Talbot should return for UFC 317. Now, he fought last year on International Fight Week against, who did he fight against? Like Yannis Gamore. I feel like Cowlin Lockwood could be a good opponent for Peyton Talbot. Cowlin Lockwood's been talking shit about Peyton Talbot on Twitter, and I know Peyton Talbot responded as well, calling major chip hazards. So they've had a bit of back and forth online, so there could be a bit of a fight to build, and Cowlin Lockwood's coming off a couple of wins. He just beat Nathan Fletcher in a controversial win at UFC London, so I think we give Cowlin Lockwood a bit of a step up against Peyton Talbot. Now, there's a 99% chance that Peyton Talbot goes out there, outboxes him, and flatlines Cowlin Lockwood, which, if that's the case, then you can't really complain. Peyton Talbot back in the winning column with a knockout, and I probably, like I said, I would favour him to beat a Cowlin Lockwood, but if Cowlin Lockwood can beat Peyton Talbot, he's just derailed the prospect even more. He's built a name on himself on International Fight Week, so kind of a step down in competition to get Peyton Talbot back in the winning column after losing to Raoni Barcelos. I'd have him on the early prelims of UFC 317 on International Fight Week, still on pay-per-view, still, you know, on the early prelims against a winnable fight, still probably going to get a highlight reel finish, but because he is coming off a loss and he's not really beating anyone of high profile yet, you can't really go anything above the early prelims, so let's get Talbot on the card against Cowlin Lockwood and see how well he does. And Cowlin Lockwood could be tough. Pressure boxer with decent cage work. Could be a tough fight for Talbot, but I reckon he gets the knockout win. And then we've got the veterans, Neil Magny versus Rafael dos Anjos. Now, these guys have fought before, and Rafael dos Anjos submitted Neil Magny, but this was years ago now, and I feel like they're now at that stage where they couldn't really rematch. And I mean, they're two veterans, and one thing the UFC like to do is stick veterans on International Fight Week. You've got Neil Magny, who debuted in the UFC in 2013, and is coming off a couple of losses, just got knocked out by Protez. You've got Rafael dos Anjos, who debuted in 2008, has just been knocked out by Jeff Neal at UFC Abu Dhabi, so they're two veterans, and like I said before, the UFC like to have a bit of a habit of sticking veterans on a card on UFC International Fight Week. They did it with Robbie Lawler at 290. They did it with a couple of names last year as well. So a bit of a veterans fight in the welterweight division. Two guys that are kind of borderline ranked, borderline unranked at 170. Neil Magny, Rafael dos Anjos. I'd probably favour Magny to win this fight because I still think he's, well, I don't think he's as washed as Rafael dos Anjos. But if dos Anjos can win against Neil Magny, I mean, it's a potential retirement opportunity to be fighting on a pay-per-view on International Fight Week, get back in the winning column. I feel like it's a perfect place to retire for both of them. Magny, dos Anjos, run it back, 317 to kick off the prelims. Winner could potentially fight again in the rankings of the top 15, even though I wouldn't really advise them to, but that could be a good fight for UFC 317. Next fight, a banger. Edson Barboza versus Nathaniel Wood, the Last Kingsman. Nathaniel Wood needs to step up in competition. He just got that really good win over Morgan Charrier, shutting down the French prospect at UFC London, showing France which country's boss, and he's been winning the vast majority of fights. He's won 5 of his last 6 fights, and even that loss to Mohamed Naimov was very controversial because of the referee's decisions and the fact that Naimov consistently cheated. And I think Edson Barboza, again, a bit of a veteran to put on UFC 317. Now, Barboza's coming off a bad loss to Lerone Murphy. He's been out for quite some time. He's been dealing with injuries. He's probably going to get the shit beaten out of him, but it was only 2 years ago when he brutally knocked out Billy Quarantillo and was ranked in the top 15 of the featherweight division. But I think it could be a good fight to get Nathaniel Wood in the top 15 at featherweight, because Nathaniel Wood only really fights on fight nights. That's why I know he fought on UFC 304, but he doesn't really fight outside of the UK. It does tend to be on UK fight nights or pay-per-views. Let's get him in the USA on the prelims of a pay-per-view of International Fight Week. If he can go out there and beat Edson Barboza in good fashion, and I feel like Nathaniel Wood, he might not be this finishing machine, but I feel like he's such a skilled dude for this division, and a veteran in Edson Barboza, his toughest test yet, I think will be the perfect fight to display the skills of Nathaniel Wood in front of a big crowd. And if he can beat Edson Barboza, get him in the top 15 of the featherweight division, get him a fight booked against a ranked fighter, and I feel like to showcase his skills, get him on pay-per-view. For Edson Barboza, similar to what I said about Rafael dos Anjos, if he can beat a big prospect in Nathaniel Wood, I know he's not really a prospect, he's in his 30s, but you know what I mean, if he can beat Nathaniel Wood, again, great place to retire. Coming off a win on the prelims of UFC 317, I think he's got everything it takes to be amazing. And it would be an amazing fight. You know, Edson Barboza is a legendary striker. Nathaniel Wood's an amazing striker too. I think this would be a banger to put on the prelims of UFC 317. Wood versus Barboza. And then I would have Kevin Vallejos versus Nate Landwehr. This has potential to be fight of the night. It has fight of the night written all over it. If you don't know who Kevin Vallejos is, this guy's a very dangerous dude. The vast majority of his wins by finish, 73% by knockout, 13% by submission, with his only professional loss being a decision loss to Gene Silver on the Contender Series. And he didn't even perform that bad against Gene Silver in that fight. He's got heavy-ass hands. He just come off a really brutal knockout of a Sung Woo Choi in his UFC debut. And I think he has potential to be the future of the featherweight division. Kind of fights very similar to Ilia Topuria, this short, stocky dude who backs people against the cage and unloads with his boxing. Against Nate Landwehr, who I've always kind of seen as like the not as good, but Justin Gaethje of the featherweight division. He just goes out there and he's so vulnerable, but he's also so dangerous. Hits like a truck, all guns blazing type of style. Will go out there and put in a scrap every single time. He's either going to be the hammer, he's either going to be the nail, but either way, it's going to be entertaining. On top of that, Kevin Villechos has called out Nate the Train, so it's a fact that I think, you know, it only adds to the hype. So Kevin Villechos, Nate Landwehr, fight of the night potential for the prelims, I think would be a banger for International Fight Week. It builds the name of Kevin Villechos, like I've said before, on International Fight Week, on UFC 317 against Nate Landwehr, and it would also be an absolute banger of a fight as well. Kevin Villechos, Nate Landwehr, perfect fight to make in the featherweight division. And then for the next fight on the prelim, Michael Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber. Now, this has obviously already been booked for UFC 317, so it's not like I'm making the fight, but Michael Johnson is a really weird fighter. Like, I feel like this dude could beat Makhachev and lose to Tony Ferguson on the same, like, in the same period of his career. He's one of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC. Sometimes you'll go out there and you'll see him get absolutely flatlined, and sometimes you go out there and see him do the flatlining. One of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC, but does tend to be a bit of a vulnerable but fun, dangerous striker. And I think Daniel Zellhuber is a great opponent that the UFC put together. He's just come off that fight of the, not even fight of the year contender, but the fight of the year in 2024 against Esteban Ribovics. In my opinion, top 5 greatest fighters in UFC history. If it had been 5 rounds, it probably would have been the best. And I think Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber, good fight for 317. The UFC have made the fight. Probably not going to go the distance. I see this being an absolute scrap where one of them gets laid out. For the prelim headliner, banger of fight for UFC 317, especially with Johnson and how he's been performing in his last 2 fights and just knocked out Otman Azatar at UFC Tampa. Perfect fight to put in the headliner of the prelims because it's going to obviously deliver. Johnson, Zellhuber, get it done. And then to open up the main card, Paulo Costa versus Roman Kopylov. Again, a fight that has already been booked for this card, but I already made this fight anyway before the UFC announced it because it just makes a lot of sense. You've got Paulo Costa, who keeps getting given top contenders, but every single time he does, loses. Got finished by Izzy, lost to Vettori, lost to Whittaker, lost to Strickland. It's time to step down. And Roman Kopolov's the perfect guy to step down too. This guy is one of the best strikers, in my opinion, in the middleweight division. He has the perfect balance of technique, but danger. You can get some strikers in the UFC that are over-technical, like Leon Edwards, and some that are just power merchants. This guy has the perfect precision, like perfect mix of both. He's so technical, but he's so dangerous at the same time. He's one of my favorite fighters in the middleweight division, is Roman Kopylov, and let's give him his biggest test yet. Maybe not his biggest. I think Anthony Hernandez is his biggest, but let's give him a test in Paulo Costa, a guy who's constantly been fighting the top guys, a heavy-handed dude who's fought for a belt before in the middleweight division. Step down for Costa, step up for Kopylov. I think this will be again an absolute banger to put on UFC 317, and it is on UFC 317 because the UFC have made this fight. So let's have Costa back on pay-per-views. Let him build the name of Roman Kopylov. An absolute striking spectacle. Let's well, I keep saying let's get the fight done. It's already made, and I'm looking forward to it. Brandon Royval versus Manel Kape. Again, a fight that the UFC have already made, and I agreed with this fight anyway. It was supposed to be a fight night main event early this year, and they've just rebooked it to put on this card. Now, even though most people would look at this as a #1 contender fight, the flyweight division is in a tricky spot where you can't really guarantee any fight is going to be a #1 contender, especially with Brandon Moreno, who's on a bit of a run right now. 2-fight winning streak, just won at UFC Mexico. But I'm a massive fan of Royval and Manel Kape because they're both killing it in their career right now. Brandon Royval, since losing that title shot to Alejandro Pantoja, has gone 2-0, beat Brandon Moreno last year and just got that good win over Tatsuro Taira, and he's ranked #1 in the division. And Manel Kape has looked completely unstoppable in his last 2 fights. He looks like a completely different fighter. He's rapid, he's takedown defense, he's dangerous. We seem to be seeing this new version of Manel Kape, and I honestly think if Manel Kape can beat Brandon Royval, I might actually pick him to beat Pantoja because I think stylistically he's a nightmare. So this could be a #1 contender fight for the flyweight division. Royval and Manel Kape on the card going at it. 2 of the best strikers, 2 guys who are killing it right now. I know flyweight tends to get a lot of hate because, you know, it's the smaller division, the pipsqueaks of the UFC, but this is a fight that I'd look forward to and a fight that I would tune into on UFC 317. So Royval, Kape for the second fight on the main card. And then, obviously, DDP versus Chimaev has now been cancelled, and I feel like we've got to put Chimaev in an interim title bout. And it's between 2 dudes, Caio Borralho and Nassourdine Imavov. Caio Borralho's on a 3-fight winning streak with a finish over Paul Craig coming off a win over Cannonier, and Imavov's on also on a 3-fight, well, longer than a 3-fight winning streak, but has 4 wins in the top 10 of the middleweight division, and just knocked out Israel Adesanya. In my opinion, Imavov's run is better than Caio Borralho's. I'm not trying to be different by picking Imavov over Borralho, but let's say the UFC do Borralho versus Chimaev. Right, great fight, great build-up, whatever. Then we've got Imavov sitting out for an entire year. I think he's earned his title fight by knocking out Israel Adesanya. I would have liked to see him versus Caio Bravo in a #1 contender fight, but if DDP's out, if there's anybody next to get a title shot, or at least an interim title fight, it should have been Nasruddin Imavov versus Khamzat Chimaev. I think this should be the fight to make, and it's a great fight as well. You've got Chimaev, who I would say is the best grappler in this division right now. I mean, he looks pretty much unstoppable with the grappling in every fight. Just demolished Robert Whittaker with this kind of new style that he's got. And for Imavov, just knocked out Israel Adesanya, arguably the best striker in this division as well. It's the definition of the best striker versus the best grappler at middleweight right now. Two guys that are on the rise, two guys that are both kind of equally deserving of a title shot. I think it's the perfect fight to make. And in the meantime, you do Caio Bravo versus Sean Strickland in a Fight Night main event. If Barallo can beat Strickland, then coming into 2026, he gets the next title fight. And the winner of Chimaev and Imavov gets DDP in August, maybe in New Zealand, where DDP tends to fight all the time. So Chimaev, Nasruddin Imavov. Listen, if the UFC do Chimaev and Caio Bravo, which everybody keeps talking about, I am not going to complain. I would look forward to that fight. You know, Caio Bravo, this fun personality from the fighting nerds who could pose a threat to Chimaev. I'm fine with that. But the fact that Imavov's name doesn't get brought up at all is kind of, I don't know, it's off-putting because the dude's earned it, man. He's probably the most deserving contender of a title shot right now in the middleweight division. Just knocked out Israel Adesanya better than anybody has before. Let's do the fight. Chimaev, Imavov, interim title bout. Undeniable, the winner of this fight gets a title fight against Dricus in August. Let's get the fight done. And then for the co-main event, Alejandro Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. Another fight that's kind of been heavily rumored for this card. And I know a lot of people are putting this fight on their own kind of card builders, but Brandon Moreno, he's just fought. He's likely to be on UFC 320 in Mexico. I don't think they'd do Moreno versus Pantoja. And obviously, we've got Manel Kape and Brandon Royval also fighting on this card. And if you look at the top 7 of the flyweight division, there is literally nobody else apart from Kai Kara-France. He's the only contender that you can really give to Pantoja as of right now. So for International Fight Week, Alejandro Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. A fight that I'm really looking forward to as well. And Kai Kara-France has deserved it. Just knocked out Steve Erceg at UFC 305. And he performed better against Steve Erceg than anybody else has before. Pantoja, Moreno, both went close decisions. Kai Kara-France got him out there in the first. And I know he lost to Amir Albazi in 2023 as well, but that wasn't a loss. He should have won that fight. It was a massive, massive robbery. So he should be on a 2-fight winning streak. And on top of that, it's such a sellable fight. You know, Kai Kara-France getting another title fight. And I'd say him and Manel Kape are the two stylistically worst fights of Pantoja. A guy with great takedown defense who also happens to hit like a truck that can capitalize on Pantoja's scrappy style. Great fight. So Pantoja defending the belt against Kai Kara-France, who he hasn't yet fought in the UFC. I think would be a great co-main event to add 2 title fights to the card. And I think you can already guess what the main event's going to be. Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. And I don't want to hear anybody in the comment section or just anybody in general being a little nerd about it, complain about the fact that Ilia Topuria hasn't deserved a title shot. Do we really want to see Islam Makhachev versus Justin fucking Gaethje? No, Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev is the fight to make. It's the best fight you can make in MMA right now, apart from Jones and Aspinall, but even that's arguable. It's huge. I don't know why there's so much fuss over this fight, like why they're so fuss about this fight not being made. It's huge. Chimaev versus Islam Makhachev, in my opinion, would be the biggest fight of 2025. It would probably be one of the biggest fights since 2021 when McGregor fought. It's a super fight. You've got two guys that look completely unstoppable right now. Makhachev, he's pound for pound the best fighter in the UFC, lightweight champion, looks unstoppable at 155 against Ilia Topuria, who, if he can beat Makhachev, has the best back-to-back wins in UFC history. And he's obviously the featherweight champion, or was the featherweight champion, undefeated, on a complete roll. Both guys beat Volkanovski. Makhachev versus Topuria, it's the best fight he can make in mixed martial arts right now. There isn't a better fight he can make. I want to see this fight headline UFC 317, because if it's not this fight, then UFC 317 really is fucked. Because then what do? Islam and Gaethje, the fight that absolutely nobody wants to see? You know, there's literally no other fight. It's not going to be Aspinall Jones. Dricus is injured. It's the only fight you can do. Makhachev, Topuria, to headline UFC 317. I would watch the shit out of this, and so would you too. Even you little nerds that are complaining about Topuria not deserving a title shot. But that would be my card for UFC 317 to kind of prove that it's not done. It's not, you know, it's not. Everyone needs to stop panicking. It's still a great card, and it can be if the UFC play their cards right. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.